Well, hi there. Here we are at the second to last week of this course, and we're talking about storage, digital file storage this week. So let's see what we're talking about. This week is really all about how to be able to access these digital files that you've been spending so much time talking about digitizing. How are we going to access those in the future? And that future could mean next week, it could mean in a year or 5 years or 50 years into the future. So that's what we're talking about this week. We're going to talk a little bit about digital preservation, some inventory procedures. I'm going to do just a pretty high level overview of digital preservation and the 3-2-1 rule, fixity and checksums, because you have a lot of those materials both in the readings and videos for this week. Some a little bit about digital file storage types and policies and procedures into the future, and then so that you can complete this part on your assignment for this week, a quick formula for calculating how much digital storage you need. So, what is digital preservation? This is a term that gets thrown around digital projects quite a bit. And, as always, some of you who work in archival institutions or situations may already have some idea of what digital preservation is. Digital preservation is not the same thing as digitization. Digital preservation is a set of plans, workflows, policies to make sure that we can access files that we have digitized in the future. And we sort of think about this on about a 3 to 5 year kind of rolling horizon. What do we need to do now to be able to access these files digitally in 3 to 5 years? And then every year or so, we go out another 3 to 5 years, and we just keep going with that rolling horizon so that we can continue to make these files accessible in the future. A lot of digital preservation discussion is at an institutional level, so where you're talking to IT departments or IT people about policies. But if you're working on a personal or family or community project, digital preservation also has relevance for you, perhaps even more so since you don't have an institutional sort of structure to lean on, because you and your family also want to be able to access these files in the future. So, digital preservation is also not about backups or not just about backups. A backup is about a continuity of operations. You want to get back to where you are today from some point in the recent future. Um, but digital preservation is actually about keeping these digital files with enough context to be usable in the future. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. You could have a great Word document that's got all of you could back up a Word document, and if it's in a format, a digital format that is obsolete in the future, like if any of you who are older remember WordStar or WordPerfect, if you can't open the software, which is the context for the file, then it doesn't matter how well you've backed up the file, if that makes sense. So, one of many considerations for digital preservation is what is the software we're going to use to open this in the future? And that's another reason why there's recommended file formats like TIFFs, PDFs. Those kinds of things, because they are more likely to be readable in the future. And I say more likely because digital preservation is one of those things that is constantly in a state of evolution. We think that PDFs, TIFFs, WAV files seem like they're pretty easily accessible, and they have been for the past decade or two, and we think they're going to be in the future, but digital preservation includes continuously reassessing those file formats. So, backups and digital preservation are both forms of risk management, but digital preservation includes a lot more considerations. Policies, procedures, financial sustainability considerations, and workflows all come into digital preservation. It's not just I'm going to back these files up. It's how often am I going to back up these files? Who's in charge of backing them up? Where are we going to store the backups? What happens if I'm not here in the future? Who's the backup to my backing up responsibilities? Who's going to pay for this in the future, especially if I'm not around? All of those kinds of considerations are what goes into digital preservation. If you're in an institution, that institutional commitment in the form of a program, as in somebody's job duties or multiple people's job duties, that's part of digital preservation. You're going to learn a bunch more about this in the webinar from the Sustainable Heritage Network. So I'm not going to repeat everything here. There's a lot more information in that webinar that I strongly recommend. One of the first things you want to do when you're starting to think about storage. So digital preservation is sort of an overarching umbrella for everything that we're doing, and now I want to get into a little bit of details. The first thing in a workflow I recommend is to set up a collection level inventory. This is not the same thing as the metadata spreadsheet that you just did a couple of weeks ago. This is more like groups of digital materials that you have, so that you can keep track of how many files are in that group or collection, what size they are, what stage you're in of digitizing if you want to, and also, where each copy of the digital files are stored. And there's a good example of this in the Digital Readiness Toolkit in Appendix B. There's a collection level inventory you can download for your own use if you'd like. You don't need to fill that out for this week's assignment. It's not any kind of requirement, but just for your own education and use in the future, starting with an inventory is a really good way to track the work that we're going to talk about for the rest of this unit. So you'll see mentioned in several places that there's a couple of foundational principles to digital preservation and storage. And one is the 3-2-1 rule, which refers to making 3 copies of your digital files on 2 different types of storage media, and one of those copies, at least one of those copies, should be stored offsite. And there's details about this in the Digital Readiness Toolkit, so I won't go into great detail here, but this 3-2-1 rule is, you see it everywhere talking about digital file storage. And another really foundational principle is the LOCKS principle, which just stands for this very simple acronym of lots of copies keep stuff safe. So the more copies you have in the more different places, the better chance you have of being able to recover at least one of them if you need them in the future. Another sort of foundational principle is fixity, which refers to the stability of a digital object. So, digital files on your computer are subject to corruption or bit rot, and this can just happen while files are sitting there on your computer. It can happen every time you move something, every time you know, save a TIFF as a JPEG, so that you can have a primary file and an access file. That bit rot can happen invisibly and you wouldn't know it necessarily. There is a pretty high level way to check this. If you're looking at maybe the number of files in a folder and the sizes of those files, you can compare those over time. Again, this is where a workflow or procedure comes into place, because you have to know when you're doing this and how often. A more technical way to check this is to compare something called checksums. A checksum is a 32-digit code that can be generated for each unique file. And it can be generated when that file is created or anytime thereafter. And then you generate another checksum after a period of time and you compare them. And if the checksum in this 32-digit code has changed at all, then you know that something about the file has changed. I know this is a little bit high level, but there are both free and low cost programs that will do this for you on Windows and Mac computers. The one that I know of that a lot of people use is called Fixity, and it's or Fixity Pro, and it's put out by a company called AVP. It's $5 a month, 30-day free trial if you wanted to just try it out to see what it looks like. And it has a graphical user interface, so a really easy way to navigate through putting some files in, telling it generate a checksum, and then after a period of time, generate another set of checksums for the same file, and then it will compare them for you and tell you if there have been any changes. So that's the kind of technical way to check on fixity. Speaking of bit rot, when you're talking about digital storage media, there are a number of different ways that you could be storing digital files, and there are some that tend to be safer and less subject to having your files just sort of randomly drop bits or get corrupted. And in the yes, absolutely, you can use these for at least one of your copies of your 321 copies. Network attached storage. So if you're in an institution and you're on a network that has a server, that's a great storage option. A RAID system, or a redundant array of independent disks. So that's a number of like hard drive disks that are kind of in a stack. Or cloud storage is another really good option. And in no case should any of these be the only copy that you have, because lots of copies keep stuff safe, right? Um, I recommend these couple of storage options with caution. For a while, these gold quote unquote archival DVDs were pretty popular. They do tend to be a little bit more stable than CDs or DVDs, but between those and external hard drives, both of them are probably fine for a few years. I recommend refreshing them often and checking them pretty often, like more often than you would need to with network storage or RAID or cloud storage. Um, and certainly, again, these should not hold the only copies of anything that you have. And then I do not recommend using these as actual digital storage media. If you've got to put some files on a jump drive to transfer them to a researcher or a patron or a family member, it's not the end of the world, but just know that your risk for corruption, file corruption, is pretty high with these little jump drives. And then same thing for CDs and DVDs. Anything that's magnetic media um, has can run the risk of file corruption. There's also a whole set of sort of storage management considerations that the Digital Readiness Toolkit talks about in a little bit more detail. And those include things like monitoring the environmental conditions. So, physically, your storage media, your hard drives, and so on, it should be kept at a stable temperature and humidity level. And again, those are in the Digital Readiness Toolkit. There's some pretty good evidence that quote unquote exercising your hard drives keeps them moving. So just going in to do a fixity check or doing a spot check every 3, 6, 12 months is good for your hard drives, so that they have to spin up and retrieve information for you every so often. Refreshing the storage media every 3 to 5 years means doing something like migrating everything over from one external hard drive to a new external hard drive. And along with that, diversifying the storage media means using different brands, so that if you're, using one particular brand of an external hard drive, that you use a different brand the next time, so that if there's any sort of brand related inconsistencies in the product, that you are missing those by moving to a different brand, theoretically. But again, none of these should refer to your only copy of digital files, because lots of copies keep stuff safe. One of your questions on your assignment this week, and also just a big question that you will want to know in the future in your digital projects, has to do with storage space. And this is what I have seen used and what I've used in my work. Basically, take the total number of files and multiply them by their average file size. And this is, it's really just kind of an estimate. But if you take the file size for an entire collection and average it out, multiply that by the number of files times 3 for your 3 copies in your 321 rule. That would give you a total number of megabytes, but then add another 10% on top of that for administrative and all kinds of other data. This formula works pretty well for like photos, documents, postcards, like 2D images. This is so much harder for audio and video, and there's not really a formula for it, because different lengths and different visuals for both audio and visual will have such a huge impact on different digital file sizes. So unfortunately for audio and video, it's really more, you need more data to be able to estimate how much digital storage space you're going to need. For the purposes of this class, estimating is totally fine. But just so you know, this is sort of the quick and dirty way that folks calculate how much digital storage space they're going to need. So for this week, of course, we have the discussion like we often do. There's a pretty brief worksheet. And again, because the worksheet is pretty brief, we know we're at the second to last week. So please be working on your final project. I've had a couple of folks ask me about the final project. Really, all you have to do is go back into each week's worksheets and integrate anything that you want to change. You don't have to consolidate everything into one like beautiful final product. If you don't want to, you're welcome to if you want to. But you can just use the documents that you've already had and already submitted and make changes to them. That's totally fine. Just put them all together in one big Word document or PDF for me so that I can grade it all together. That's it. Let me know if you've got questions. Thanks.